and we are funding some awful atrocities, and also some just stunning mediocrity and banality, right? It's the, when it's not atrocious, it's also just stultifying and boring, right? And people just sitting around, like think about how much time between the age of 18 and when you got out, you did nothing. You just wasted, right? As a young person, when other people are building what's called social capital. One researcher said people inside are building criminal capital. And Elie Wiesel said the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And I think the things that make the headlines are the violent, terrible things that happen in prisons. What's harder to capture is the indifference that goes on there. And I tell you, probation and parole reek of indifference. It is people sitting in rooms like this for hours to go in and be asked the same 5 questions they were asked a week before, and then next. It's like the way you all feel when you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, right? And all you're doing is you're a good citizen paying money to be registered to drive your car or own that car, right? And you still come out somehow feeling a little dirtier and a little more bureaucratized. Now imagine that person, that clerk behind the desk, could tell you when you could wake up, when you could go to sleep, whether you could get a credit card, whether you could stay out past 7 o'clock at night. Imagine that level of control. We need to recoil a little from that level of control. And the public just needs to understand it more, and as they have around prisons, not so much around probation and parole. The numbers have come down, and there's been more activism and agitation. I think if that can happen with probation and parole, similar things will happen. We saw it with McMill a little, but that was kind of a blip, right? And everybody was like, "Oh my God, probation, ooh, a butterfly." So now like we just got to stick with that a little bit.
Right. You this should be a little more personal here. I'm a new driver, right? I just started driving.
So everybody be careful on the way there.
Just started driving, but I chose to get my license as a health and life insurance agent before I got my driver's license. So I went into that field, and I passed the test. I studied, got the book, did everything I had to do. I studied, and guess what happened, Benny? Once I passed the test, I was denied from different life insurance agencies because I was on parole. And I'm like, man, I just studied and did all this stuff, paid all my money and went through all this here, and no one would hire me as a health and life insurance agent because I have a parole record. Then it took me time. I found one agency was willing to hire me. Right? So when I'm getting from you, the story is like, people don't know about this stuff. They don't understand that different roadblocks exist. Once you come home, even when you're trying to do the right thing, you're being prevented to live as a full citizen. Michelle and I went out to dinner with a good friend of ours, and her partner was from Germany.
You need Michelle, your fiance.
My fiance, Michelle. Beautiful right there, man. See how you went out to dinner.
It's a family thing.
This is a family thing here. And my cousins came with his fiance, right? And so everything is wonderful here. We went out to dinner, Vinny, and my friend's partner is from Germany. And she was my friend, she's from Georgetown, he's a professor. So she was sharing with him where, he's a returned citizen. And he was like, returned citizen? Like, what that means? Like, he loses citizenship? Like, he couldn't even understand what that meant, right? So these are some of the things that, I want to ask you from our outside the U.S. How is parole and probation being viewed on the international frontier? What is the difference between how we do things here in the U.S. and is our foreign counterparts doing that better, particularly the industrialized nation?
Yeah, I don't know as much about probation and parole in Europe. I do know a little bit about probation and parole in the United Kingdom. There's a book called Pervasive Punishment by a professor named Fergus McNeill about the UK system, and it's traveling a similar path. I think the UK is kind of following U.S. Penological practices, unfortunately. And so what Fergus writes about what's going on in the UK, I'm actually getting interviewed by the John Howard League in London
Okay.
on a book, and Fergus is going to be the interviewer, like you are right now. It's seemingly drifting in the same direction, risk-averse punishment. Europe, though, has much more progressive prison policies, and the prisons, generally the ones I've been to, are much better than ours, and they use them much less frequently. They've managed to figure out a way to be much more humanistic in what goes on in prison. And the collateral consequences, like what you just described, are nowhere near as harsh as they are in the US. So a lot of employers don't even get to know that you are formerly incarcerated and have a criminal record like that. And it's interesting because, there's not enough research on this subject, but the research I've seen shows that formerly incarcerated people do no worse. Like one of my colleagues, Diva Pager, from when I was at Harvard, had done some groundbreaking research about the first Gulf War, and there was this big surge in the number of troops we needed. So the Army loosened its restrictions on people, allowing people in with criminal records. And what Diva found was that people who came in with criminal records were no more likely to be dishonorably discharged and were more likely to make sergeant than the people in the military without criminal records. When I ran Rikers, my first deputy, the guy who made my first deputy, was a guy named Stanley Richards, and Stanley was formerly incarcerated. In fact, we moved our offices onto Rikers Island, and Stanley's window looked out over the cell he was in when he was locked up as a teenager on Rikers Island. And Stanley was fantastic. And what was really terrific was when Stanley used to walk to tears with me, guys would come up and hug him. The guys that were incarcerated here.
Right.
Correctional officers didn't like it as much. Some of them did, some of them did not. Some of them were really mad that the first deputy was formerly incarcerated, but some of them weren't. But the incarcerated guys loved it because it felt like we have a chance. It was like a walking example of where they could go. It was that kind of hope that we talked about.
Yeah. Well, I think, I don't know, we are in time.
Next question.
To get some questions from the audience
How we
here.
doing?
Perfect.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
You have another question you can ask, or you ready to open it up?
Sure.
All right. So it's time
I
for
want to take the moment to help us understand the man behind this book, right? Before we get into the book, we want to just have a conversation about, Vinny, how do you get involved in this space? What started you off in the very beginning, Vinny?
Can you all hear me if I talk like this? Yeah. Is that good? Thanks, Joelle. I want to thank you for doing this tonight. I want to thank the busboys and poets and all the wonderful hospitality you've shown us tonight. But my family's here too, so I want to acknowledge my wife, Grace, my son, Nick. Save your applause, I got a lot more family. I got Grace's parents, John and Grace, and her sister and sister-in-law. I don't see where they are, and Lisa and Joy. But most importantly, I want to acknowledge my daughter Tara, whose birthday is tomorrow. Tara,
Happy birthday.
she told me before this that if people want to come up, total strangers, and wish her happy birthday or sing to her happy birthday, she's totally good at that too. So now to answer your question. Oh, I might say that. So now to answer your question. So I started out. My first job in this field was in 1980 as a house parent in a home.
Vinny, you have to try to speak towards the light.
Oh, okay. You know, I'm gonna take it off this thing. I can just look at you. There you go. How's that?
Better.
Thanks, Monica. So I started out in 1980 as a house parent in a home for juvenile delinquent boys and girls. It was a living job, and I just kind of fell in love with it. It was really rewarding to work with the kids, but at the same time, just in a few years, I was starting to get that mindset as a state bureaucrat and not to realize that we were taking kids out of home that really could have been served better at their homes and doing things inside the facility that really didn't kind of match up with what you want your own want to happen to their own child if they were in the same situation. So then for the next 20 years, I went into nonprofits, Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice, Justice Policy Institute, and then Justice Policy Institute was here in DC, still is.
Yes.
And I, was a very loud critic of the juvenile justice system here. And Mayor Williams hired me to run it. It was kind of like a put up or shut up moment. And I really never thought I'd go into government. I figured I'd be in nonprofits my whole life. And that really kind of got me into the government work. And I was proud of what we did here. We took a terrible facility, Oak Hill, and closed it. And most of the kids went into the community with services. And the place that was left behind in the beginning was much more decent and humane. But I was done. It was those were dog years, 5 years, and a lot of sabotage and criticism and all that. But then Mayor Bloomberg recruited me to run probation in New York City. And again, I had never run a probation department, never worked in one. And that's when I started to think about like mass supervision and the impacts it was having on people. So that gets me almost to today. I'm an old guy, but I don't always say everybody's time.
You're a family man. You open up by acknowledging every member of your family, which is a testament to how you value family. Why juvenile? What got the focus there in the beginning?
Well, I've worked with juveniles, I've worked with adults, and I think what's I've always found interesting is you can do a lot more in the juvenile space that focus on rehabilitation and reduce incarceration. Like the number of kids in custody nationally has fallen by 70% since the year 2000, and that hasn't happened with adults. It's fallen, but it hasn't happened that much. And I think in part that's because people think of juveniles to some degree as human beings, and they have a lot more empathy for them in ways that we've stopped having for adults. And I think your experience in some respects shows that. The fact that we're able to give people such crazy long sentences followed by crazy long periods of time under supervision shows me that we haven't turned the corner, and we haven't even come close to turning the corner for adults. I think for juveniles, we can get away with a lot more in terms of humanity and decency, and that has not, in my view, yet happened sufficiently for adults.
Yeah. In your early years, when you were working in DC, Oak Hill, what were some of the challenges there?
Oh God, how much time you got? It was awful. Staff were beating the kids up, they were sexually assaulting them. And by the way, I'm going to say a lot of stuff that's hard to hear. Yeah. And I just want folks to know that that's just, you can't talk about this without doing that. So if that's going to trigger folks or upset you, now would probably be a decent time to leave. And I don't want you to leave. I'm just telling you that you can't talk about this without that.
It's a great topic.
So, drugs were so rampant in the place that kids were testing positive after 30 days more frequently than when they came in the front door, which meant it was easier to score in Oak Hill than on the streets of the District of Columbia. So it was that kind of crazy. And I hear Tyrone. I love you, Tyrone. You're great out there. I'm hearing you giving me your amens back there.
He's in the back. Hey, Ty.
Tyrone,